seat. We'd like to get started. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our Sebastopol Connect SDAT final presentation. Appreciate all of you coming out on a Friday night. My name is Paul Fritz. I am a local architect and I'm on the steering committee for Sebastopol Connect SDAT. And I'd like to thank our sponsors. These are local people who have contributed either monetarily or in-kind services to the past 3 days, the event of the past 3 days. And also to our fabulous volunteer crew. We've had people the past 3 days helping set up this room, welcome people, accept donations, etc., and also helping the team prepare their thoughts and ideas and presentation for tonight. I'd also like to, speaking of donations, I'd like to remind everyone that we are accepting donations. The way this grant works is the American Institute of Architects contributes a portion of the money to accommodate and transport the team here, but the city, the local community, is required to come up with a $5,000 matching donation, and we're well on our way towards that, but we could still use some more, so if anyone feels the need to donate or the desire to donate, we'd be happy to accommodate you. A little bit just about the background. This all started with the core project design ideas competition about a year ago. Many of you probably were aware of that and are on our mailing list. And after the competition ended, we thought, well, what do we do with all these great ideas? We need to move something forward, and so we kept trying to think of next steps. And last summer we had some meetings about the general plan update process to inform people about that, because that was an important planning thing that's coming up. And then we were made aware of this grant from the American Institute of Architects, and we thought it would be a really good opportunity for us to take some of this excitement and energy we've sensed in the community about the future of Sebastopol. And so we applied for that and were awarded the grant. We found out in December, so since then we've been preparing for the past 3 days. So thanks again for coming. I'm going to introduce Wayne Fiden, who is our team leader, and he will carry us through the rest of the evening. Thank you very much.
Patrick's entirely too modest. There's an enormous amount of work the core project had to do, and the city had to do for this project. So thank you very much. There's so much more to say. Many of you here are on Wednesday. I'm not going to reintroduce the whole team, but just quickly about the process. So AIA has helped underwrite the cost of this project. It's a donation from architects around the country because they really think communities should be thinking about sustainable design, should be thinking about ways they can make their downtowns more vibrant and their communities more sustainable. The team members themselves, all 6 of us you're going to hear from tonight, are all volunteers. We all take part in this process, both frankly because it's intellectually stimulating for us, but also because we think what you're doing here is really exciting and there's some real opportunities, and we want to come back in 10 years and see a transformed community. And I guess sort of the last comment about that is, I've been to a lot of communities around the country who are sort of stuck, who don't know how to move forward. One of the reasons this is a really exciting project for us is this is a community that really can be transformed. You have lots of community debates, which is wonderful, it's a healthy thing. Even in your worst meetings where you're at each other's throats, think of that as a good thing, not a bad thing. But at least from what we've seen, your community debate is helpful. You talk to each other instead of talking in separate rooms around people's backs. As long as you're talking to each other, then that's what it takes to be able to move forward. We've had a series of meetings. The 2 AIA staff and myself will have here in January to sort of scope things out, and then the full team arrived here on English traffic time on Tuesday night, right? Tuesday night. We had focus groups on Wednesday during the day. We had a public town hall meeting at night. We did a separate focus group at the high school and heard lots of different comments. I'm sure you all can guess the sorts of things that people say to us. But it's really interesting to show the flavor of the community. I think some of it helped us understand what kind of community you are, but it also highlighted, I think, some of both the challenges for us and the opportunities going forward. So specifically, I want to talk about, in concrete terms, some of the things that we heard. The first is you have a strong downtown. If you look at the downtown for the 50,000 people for whose service area it is, it could be stronger, and that's why we're here. If you look at a downtown for 208,000 people, it's an amazing downtown, probably second to almost none for 208,000 people. But nonetheless, given that you do serve a large area, there are clearly opportunities to do more. One of the questions that we asked is, tell us what's the center of downtown? Where do you hang out? And that was one of the answers, frankly, that was less satisfying than I would have liked. We went to the high school, they told us they hung out at Safeway. And I know the kids will be kids. I have a 17-year-old daughter, so I understand some of that. But it's still, it's not a perfect sign of heaven. Then we heard people say they hung out at the town square, which is great. And they found some issues with town square that were lacking. We were surprised at how few people told us they hung out in Main Street itself. Even just asking people, okay, define for me what's the center of downtown. Very few people said it's Main Street, even though ultimately you're a market town. So, it's sort of part of the final piece. And then, we went through these. I'm not going to read through this whole list. You all know the town better than I do. But we heard in 50 different ways challenges about how the town is really dominated by traffic going through downtown. The cars go through a lot of volume traffic. People feel unsafe to cross the street. Going back to the quotes a couple slides ago, parents and kids telling us they would not bicycle on Main Street or in some of the other streets. They were uncomfortable crossing the street. They didn't really feel like the town was as defined as it could be because they felt like we had these highways that go through downtown. And so clearly was part of what we saw, the rail trail, the bike path, and at the edge of downtown, an amazing resource, but then not really continuing through. Sometimes a lack of definition. And again, none of these things weaken the strength of the city, but they're all, in some ways, opportunities. How can you make it stronger? And then we heard, other things about that. It was sort of the whole debate that's been going on, I guess, for years about the Northeast plan, and that didn't go forward. And so, what's the guiding vision? You have the Barlow project. I think most people on the team think it's a really exciting project, but it didn't really seem like it was driven by clear, community-driven consensus for what should be there. And I think the failed CDS project is sort of clearly represents that there wasn't a clear consensus up front, and so that makes decision-making more difficult. I think one of the things you're going to hear from team members throughout tonight is the process is best served for everybody when we do a planning process up front and build a consensus up front. And that developers like that because they know what the rules are up front, and residents like that because they know what the rules are up front and they agree on what the rules are. And so that will show up in different ways when we're talking about private sector development and public sector development as the team members go forward. And then, finally, there's amazing opportunities for downtown. We think of downtown as sort of that whole core area, the traditional downtown, the Barlow, how they fit together. One of the things that planners often look at is the jargon is jobs, housing, balance. Are there about as many people who live in town as there are jobs? And if you just look at the city itself, so not West County, but just look at the city itself, you have an amazing balance. You have about 4,000 people who are employed, and you have about 4,000 jobs. The number's a couple years old, but so you have a balance, but of course you have all of West County. So you have a lot of traffic that's going through town, to jobs east of here, and so you don't have a balance in that sense. But for us, one of the cores of what makes cities great is a synergy. I can go out to a suburban shopping plaza, and I go out and buy my food there, I buy my drugs, or I buy whatever I do, and I go there, and I leave, and I go home. If I go downtown, I park my car, I go to a couple of stores, I meet friends, there's a synergy of those things that build on each other. And so jobs downtown are much more valuable than jobs elsewhere because they have this multiplier effect. You go downtown, you don't bring your lunch, you eat. Housing downtown or housing within walking distance of downtown has the same multiplier effect. So, we're generally excited about downtowns generally, and that's why this whole team is here, and your downtown in particular has this amazing opportunities. So with that, Ken Buckland, who's a planner, is going to start the process, and we're going to go through our whole presentation, and then we're happy to take questions afterwards for as long as you want. I'm going to start the presentation.
Thank you, Wayne, and thank you all for showing up. This has been an intensive 3 days. I appreciate the time to tell you what we've been thinking about and some of the ideas, and hopefully you can take these things into the future as well. So one of the things that we like to consider when we're looking at different communities is where the history of this city here, and how was it created, and what reason. Let's add a crossroads. And you think about what was happening out there. There was a center of commerce, social commerce, mercantile commerce, of a situation that was based on the idea that not only the roads were there, but if you've seen the old pictures, you see the trains was running down Main Street as well too. And so it became part of that fabric of what created the town, the city you know as Sebastopol. But in terms of the change over time, it has changed. It's grown, it's developed. The crossroads are still there, but more than that, what's happened is that it's developed in a different way, and we have to consider it in a different form than it was before, just as the crossroads. You have to think of the idea that there are corridors that run through, and they have different characters as they get closer to the core. And that initial little set of stores around the intersection of the main roads is now something that's larger as a core of the downtown. And when we look at that, that's when we start to think about what is the downtown and what are the characteristics, how do we think about what the future of that location is. Because right now we're having this green belt of a laguna that sets a boundary. And it's not an annexation issue that you can overcome. That's a natural resource that really defines that side of that boundary of the community. So when we look at within that core, one of the first things we did was start to think about, there's a whole series of parcels that, as urban designers and planners and architects, and landscape architects, we'd start to take a peek at and we start to think about what can we make them different? How can we make them more improved in terms of their relationship to the community? And looking at even at the link that starts to work towards the laguna or the trailer park, even though that's outside the city boundary, that becomes an obligation to address in some way. The idea that maybe some spaces, such as the parking lot, could be temporary. It's right at the end of the bike path, have some temporary activities that attract people and bring them into the downtown. But when we look when we talked to people in the community, what we saw was that right in the middle of the plaza seemed to be what we think of as the heart of the downtown. And how do we address what goes on around that plaza? Well, I was born outside of Walnut Creek, but the fact is I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, and one of the first things I thought of was what does Princeton have? Where I used to, when I was in 8th grade, I was selling Christmas trees in that plaza in the middle of the downtown. Here's the Main Street, Nassau Street, that runs. It's separated. It's surrounded by development. It frames it up, and yet it has a road that runs completely around that square. And it's very comfortable. It's a very safe. It's a very, very attractive location, and that's what we want to accomplish in this area. So we start to think about a couple of parcels, and I picked first off. We thought about the Whole Foods site and what happens on that location there. Here you have a parking lot that faces the plaza. You have the buildings and essentially a strip commercial center set back from the street. If we start to reverse that, say, let's put our buildings up front, create that street wall across here, and put the parking behind, we have a very different kind of character and quality of this space. But that may be a little bit far-fetched because Whole Foods is making a ton of money right now. They're not necessarily going to be redeveloping it anytime soon. But there is a parcel of land that's apparently up for sale at this point, which is the lumberyard over on Petaluma on the side there. Well, that has some interesting possibilities as well, because what we can think about, we have a line of street trees, but they're inside the property. They're essentially owned by the property owner, but they act as street trees, and we have that boundary, that link across Petaluma that could be of value in future development, and how this street operates. We also have a framework in which development could occur. We could put some structure, some construction. I'm showing a little green on here. We have a green roof, the idea of the sustainable. But there's more than just some of those design aspects to it. The reason why this line here is we're looking at potentially balconies, because when we look at a cross-section, we think, all right, if we had enough development on there, we could get the kind of values, the kind of benefits to the community that we want to have. And what we do is we provide the extra floor. This is 3 and 3+ stories, with the idea that there's the balconies out there at the top. It pushes back the building, so from the street line, you're not seeing a full 4-story building. What you're seeing is something less. And you're probably familiar with that because you've seen that same regulation applied elsewhere in the community. With commercial space on the front to activate the location, and what we're showing is very little parking, and I wanted to talk to you about that, because I think that's an important piece of what happens on the property. Because we've looked at, and other people have looked around the country at what different downtown projects require for parking, and how that fits with residential development. As you can see, there's a whole series of numbers. I'm going to quiz you on these ones, ask you about which town has the 1.2 parking ratio. But the fact is, what happens is it comes out to about 1.1 parking spaces per residential unit in these projects. And they also locate the distance to transit, the idea you get from that location somewhere else. Well, I was looking at what's happening on this property and saying, it takes only 47 steps from that property over to where the transit is. I maybe have longer legs than you, I don't know how many you count, but 126 steps up to Main Street. You're connected, and think about it, it's a little bit further into the Barlow, but think about the idea that it's very walkable, you're very well connected in that location. And there's another value to the people who live in those units as well, and that's that where is their money going? It goes into something that's lost and depreciated in a vehicle, which, just as a matter of fact, in terms of rule of thumb, the cost that you would pay for having a vehicle for a year could pay for a mortgage, $100,000 more in mortgage on a property. So you can think about, you start to increase your living conditions as a result of having at least one fewer car, if not no car. So how do we get there from here in terms of that? It's the zoning that creates the basis for development. Right now, what we're seeing in terms of your zoning is it's really based on what's on the ground. We've tried to map this out, and that's why it looks like a fairly, a lot of times I tell people that zoning is like trying to read War and Peace in the original Russian. It's a tough thing to get through, but what's being done here, typically what you see in a lot of communities, is that it's pretty much what's on the ground right now. I think what you want to do instead is start to think about where it could go in the future. What can you accomplish with the zoning regulations, the real power you have? There are two aspects to the control you have on land use and development. That's the infrastructure is one, the capital programs you have, and the other is the zoning, the land use regulations that you put in place. Well, you need a general plan update for one, and that can start to lead you into the changes that are supported by zoning. But you can, in that zoning, define what you want to accomplish within those districts. Now, you have to be careful about this. You have to provide the flexibility, because what happens is if you start saying, I want a butterfly museum in zoning, as a matter of fact, you won't necessarily get it because the market isn't there for that. But the fact is that what you can do is, if you have enough flexibility and then start to talk about what you want to accomplish with the zoning, then you can do that with the planning process you have. There's one other aspect, and this came out as a result of looking at that Northeast specific plan. What happened with that? You don't have the same redevelopment authority anymore because of the way the state law went. What you have is a potential to position your properties. Think about specifically properties. Maybe the lumberyard is one. Maybe there's some other properties that you start to think about. Maybe there are a few different properties. And how you start to base what you're doing, the pre-planning program. You're trying to define what you want as a community, what you want from the developer, and what benefits you'll provide to the developer to conform to that. So what you're trying to do is limit the problems that are associated with the entitlement process, the permitting process, Smooth it out by you as a community starting out first to define what you want to accomplish on there and what you're willing to give. If the developer comes forward and starts to do what you want, well, what benefits are they going to get from it? They want to reduce their risk as well too, and not just pay out for all of that mitigation. So the fact is you can do this in a process, and what you can do with that then is, and that information, is not just put it on a plan and hand it over to the city planner's office, or the city council, but to actually go out and market the property. Look for the developers, look for the businesses. One of the best ways that downtown start to develop themselves in terms of improving the quality of the downtown is actually to go out and find another business that's being successful elsewhere and tell that business owner, look, we have a great downtown, we have a great site for your second business. Do you want to come in and open up a new business in that location and start to reap the benefits of being in this great town of Sebastopol? And set up your marketing brochure and say, here's what we got. You're the real estate, you may not have Ron Burgundy helping you out in terms of the marketing. The fact is, what you can do is think about it this way of projecting to others and actually reaching out and being a little more active in the development process and redevelopment process once you define what you're willing to do as a community. And now I'll turn it over to Leslie again.
Great, thanks. It's really been wonderful spending these last 3 days here and getting to know a fabulous community. I want to follow up on the idea of being proactive and knowing what you want, because if you can be ahead of change, you're a lot better off. And thinking too about what kinds of things that you want. That you have design guidelines in place, and there was a desire when we were coming here to take a look at those specifically. And so we've done that, and I've written design guidelines, and the best thing you can do is have a good developer. So I'm hoping your marketing program works. But the thing that's good about design guidelines is it gives you a chance to think about what you care about. There's some design guidelines that tell you what style to build everything, and there are towns that want to be Bavarian or whatever. But you guys don't want everything to look the same. So your design guidelines are a great opportunity to figure out what you care about together. And even though there are a lot of differences of opinion, it was very encouraging to hear a lot of agreement from what people were saying. So it's a frame of reference for a conversation. It's a conversation between you, the community, the property owner, the regulators of the city, as to what you want. And to have that conversation before it needs to happen, so you don't find yourself all of a sudden scrambling when a company from out of town comes and wants to put a drugstore somewhere that you're not comfortable with. So have that conversation now, and have it be a positive thing. So if you're looking for design that is going to reflect your values, here's a chance for looking at what those are, and just coming in and looking and talking to you. There's a lot of them that I think are very easy to agree on. One is a great natural setting. The oaks and the redwoods are astonishing, and you're in the middle of a forest for much of your city. Topography, there's views, you know what they all are. It's a wonderful place, and you want it to spring from your natural setting. Great book tree. You've got a really interesting history. And a lot of communities, their history is really not legible anymore. But it's very easy to see where you came from. The apples, the warehouses, the trains, and those come with built forms. This wonderful train shed form, and those long, very simple, elegant buildings are a wonderful piece of your fabric, and a main street. You've got some interesting icons. The church at the end of the street has a great vista. You've got a wonderful railroad car at a great diagonal. If you could kind of liberate it from some of the cars, it would be a wonderful representation of your town that maybe you're not even fully aware of yourselves. The main street is an irreplaceable typology. You know, a lot of communities want this. They make it up. It looks like Disneyland. You have the real thing, and it's something you really need to appreciate, that fine-grained scale. And there are some little through routes that I want to talk about too, because one of the things we heard is that Main Street isn't as connected to the town square as you'd like, but there's opportunities to do that, and some of them are kind of sneaky, but they're there. Great architectural legacy in the single-family homes, the Victorians, the bungalows. You want to draw on that, but you also need to think about what it means to build for the future. In the end, it's about people. One of the things that we've heard from you guys is what you love most about here isn't all the great stuff I just talked about, but it's really the people. The friendliness, the ability to talk to one another. So you want design that is going to start filling in the gaps that you have in your city, that it makes it more humane, that makes it more comfortable, more interesting, more active. So when you're looking at projects coming into your city, yeah, development's scary, but if there's change coming and you're ahead of it, that's what you want to look for, is what are the gaps that you can make better. One of the things that we've heard that's such, it's a favorite word, quirky, you're quirky. And I hope the guy who does these is in here tonight. It's just really, really fun. So stay quirky. Don't make everything the same. Make design guidelines that encourage the uniqueness of a place. You're artistic. Wonderful stuff to walk around and see. Sustainability is something that actually can change style of architecture. We've forgotten a lot from what people used to know. But you've got solar panels on buildings, you've got edible plants out in front of there. There's ways of shading and making entryways that are green. Those things need to be reflected in your new buildings, and you can ask people to do that. You can make places that have more seating, more activities, and that can be rolled into the design guidelines. One of the things that I want to point out are some diamonds in the rough. I'm a real fan of alleyways because I think they're real human scale kind of space, and I don't think you've discovered all of them. I'm going to show you one that we've been playing with in Seattle in Pioneer Square, our historic district. But we've put art, lighting, white table sit-down dinners. They're great size spaces, and they don't have any cars in. So connections is something we've heard a lot about. There's a lot of different kinds of connections. This one goes to Barlow, and you know what? It's really pretty cool. You've got canopy, you've got a green wall with a theater, and my hope for you is that, I'll talk about this in a minute, you keep that character of that street. So a couple of thoughts on your current design guidelines. Right now, there's guidelines that cover the entire city. And Main Street's different than the Barlow is different than the single-family homes. And so I think you can tailor some of those guidelines so that you've got things that might be different at the entryway. You can locate those. The core has an interesting line down it where it just seems to correspond to the flood zone, where you've got the industrial typology in Main Street. So as Ken was saying, the core can get bigger, but that doesn't mean it has to have homogeneous design. So increase the character of each places. Another tool that you have in design guidelines and with the zoning is to designate some streets as pedestrian priority streets. This is existing figure ground. And the red lines here show where you might want to encourage the pedestrian routes. So you can kind of decide where those pedestrian places are with the windows and the activities. And maybe you even want to go further than that. And those yellow dots are some wonderful pedestrian routes through buildings and through open spaces. There's a lot of them out here to find. In terms of process with design review, it's really helpful to have that framework for the conversation in the same way that designers design. So you start and you say, what's unique about this place? What makes it special? What are the opportunities with my project to make it even more unique and special? So what is the concept of what my program is, whether it's a hotel that would be great or residential? How does that program for the particular building and that site work together? And third, how do you execute that? What are the details, the materials? How do you make a quality building that your community deserves? But it's not just design guidelines. The discussion you have in creating the design guidelines are really for you, not just waiting around for the next developer, but to humanize this place your own selves. You've got great examples of it. I love this. It's a very simple shed building, but what's next to it that connects to that building makes it fabulous. It doesn't take much, you know, a chair and a non-parking spot. Make a great people space. You know what to do. Your public realm is what most people care about in guidelines. Those wonderful fingers of open space that run along the warehouse forms. This is one of my favorite little through routes in a little island town in Washington State. Wonderful human-scale spaces that can start to weave through from Main Street to the park behind. You've got some examples already. And they can lead you in and up, entice people. Think about the language of your street. And engineers, with all due respect to traffic engineers, we have let them design the public realm. And streets are a quarter to a third of most cities. Take it back. Don't paint it red and yellow, and make it part of the place. Here's the language of the street. You know, it doesn't have to be designed for cars. Make it for people. Make it for natural systems. Use good materials. There's a little bitty 2-inch curb, so you know the materials going across there means that you can use the space as a pedestrian. The language of public space. You know, somebody spent a lot of work making a nice front to the restaurant, and you guys, you get the dumpster and the paint there. I don't know what that's doing, but these are cheap fixes. So design for who you are, design for the best of who you want to be for the future, and I wish you all the best of luck.
Leslie set up a great segue for me, and so I'm going to try and capitalize on what she said and then set the stage for Steve, who will talk about bikes and pedestrians. I think one of the important things that you said is that you know what to do. And so as happy as we are to be visitors, we are visitors. And so what we're really doing is telling you about the observations that we've made in your community in a very short period of time, but nonetheless, they're serving as very general recommendations for how you can capitalize on the assets that you have in your city. And so what I want to talk about very briefly is nature, which means you can't talk about nature very briefly, but I'm actually going to try and do it in a few minutes. And what I want to do is talk about it in a way that helps you think about it as a framework for how you can actually shape the city in the future as you move forward, as everybody uses the term. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Can you pull up the volume?
Right. I'm kind of a Luddite on all this stuff, so. Is that better? Okay, great, sorry. All right, so what I first want to say is that, and I think it's very obvious to everybody, are we going backwards? Sebastopol is a very rich city because you are set in a very rich landscape. And so this is the city in nature. And without going into a great amount of detail, this graphic simply shows you that you're actually surrounded by a very wide variety of cultivated and natural lands, whether we're looking at wetlands, stream corridors, floodplains, cultivated agricultural lands, patches of woodland. It's a little bit, it's not shaky on the north and the south, but you can see that there are opportunities both on the north and south to really reinforce and strengthen this green belt. So what I'm saying is, this is a city that is set in the landscape, and so the question is, how do you bring that landscape, how do you bring those wonderful natural and culturally cultivated resources into your city? How do you create nature in the city? And what we're suggesting is, it seems that there are two ways in which you can do it, and there are two levels that you can do it on. One is the streetscape level. This is a very simple graphic diagram that shows you that there are opportunities to create a simple system of neighborhood greenways, which can act as fingers in the city that connect existing parks, existing trails, existing quiet streets, and also can create the opportunity for identifying areas in the city which could be developed as additional parks or open space, especially in those parts of town that are underserved by those kinds of spaces. The second way, and I'll get to this in a minute, is individual lots, whether they're publicly owned or privately owned, whether they're commercial or residential. And what we're saying is that at these two scales, they're both actually in the public realm because they're visible to everybody. And it doesn't matter if you're a citizen or a visitor. This is the city that you see. So it's not just downtown, but it's all parts of the city. And we actually walked and rode around many parts of these neighborhoods. And so we're saying that there are wonderful opportunities at both the street scale and the individual lot scale to manifest this notion of nature in the city. Let's just talk on this diagram very briefly about what we mean by neighborhood greenway. This is just a diagram. It's generic. It's not detailed design or anything, but it shows that actually in the Barlow, there really is an opportunity for north-south pedestrian corridors. You could technically connect to the high school, which means that it would be easier for students to walk down from the school into the Barlow. And you actually, especially with amenable private property owners, connect all the way down to the Rodota Trail with simple corridor vegetation. And there are opportunities at both the north and the south ends to create pocket parks, usually these individual sites that we're really talking about. Here's a little bit closer, a generic detail of what we're meaning. At this north end, you can see the barbecue. We're right behind the cinema. There's actually a gas line that perhaps has the potential in the future to be a pedestrian or a bike corridor. At the north ends, there are empty spaces that could simply be vegetated with trees. And vegetation, what that does is it really marks that corridor. It tells people where they are, and it tells them where they're going, and it's also a very simple way to, again, bring nature into the city. The same at the south edge. Let's see if I can do this right. Very simple trees will actually reinforce what's already been planted along McKinley, but again, these simple techniques using vegetation, using nature, really tell you where you are. So you're kind of meeting multiple objectives with things that you folks are actually already expert at, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Here's just a very quick section showing how vegetation, the use of nature, can really serve not only to soften your streetscape, but again, it's all of this wayfinding, using special plantings that are particularly amenable to urban woodlands. You folks are very knowledgeable about the plant palette that you use here. You understand water use and native species and things like that, so it would not be difficult to really have a collection of plants that might be amenable. Again, they identify trails and corridors that can be used for manifestation of ecological principles, and they just help build out the streetscape and reinforce this whole notion of nature in the city. Here's an example of what we're talking about for neighborhood greenways. This is a very generic little site diagram of a green street. We have the boulevard has been turned into a bioswale, so ground plants are filtering water. We're using street trees to create an urban canopy, so both the ground plane and the vertical plane provide shade and also pleasant appearance. We've created some, oops, I'm sorry. Like I said, I'm really loaded out of this stuff, so hang on. We've created some curb bump outs, planted them with trees that narrows the street down, and it's also great wayfinding to tell people that they're either entering or leaving the greenway. So we actually rode around town and found some pretty interesting streets that Steve can talk to you about that might be amenable to this if the neighborhood is amenable. And of course, we're talking here at a street scale level, and so we're really talking about an interconnected system. We're not talking about streets that are independently located that don't connect up to anything. Here's just a very quick little section showing you how a bioswale is built and its relationship not only to cars and the street, how it narrows down the street, but the relationship that it also has to pedestrians. And I don't know if you guys, but if quirky is quirky, then that's about the quirkiest car I've ever seen. Again, here's an example, and in fact, I'm going to go a little bit further here. But we can stop here. If we talk about the individual lot scale, what I'm really talking about are several things. The city is really lush, and if you come in as a visitor, and I'm a landscape architect and I'm also a master gardener, it's very rare to come into a small town like this and see as many beautiful gardens and yards and streets as you've seen. So I'm not complimenting you in an arrogant way, I'm complimenting you in a way that really acknowledges your expertise in horticulture. So at the individual lot and site scale, this could be a garden city, and this could be a way to really distinguish yourself from other cities in the valley. And it plays on that wonderful horticultural tradition that Luther Burbank started here. And then it also plays on your current expertise. So why not take advantage of that knowledge and reinforce this notion of civic horticulture? It's frankly, it's feasible, it's affordable. These projects don't have to be overwhelming. And so we think that there are like 3 places where this could happen. And one of them is empty spaces in the city, whether they're public or private. And we're not talking about ownership issues here, we're just saying that there are places in the city that could become vegetated, planted lots. They can become pocket parks, especially in those parts of the city that, again, as we mentioned, are underserved and don't have enough natural open space, or they're next to schools that don't necessarily have enough green space around them. And so this is just an example of a little corner lot that simply could have trees on it, perhaps benches, flowers. We're not talking about a complicated landscape design. Here's an example of a corner, again, corner unused lots, curb bump outs, very simple ways that you can plant up, and actually you've started to do that with crosswalks. They're great little examples of flowers and things that are in the crosswalks, but why not do that at corners to create reinforcement of the garden city, and it also protects pedestrians from traffic, and it serves as a reinforcement for wayfinding, which Steve is going to talk about in a minute. Again, lush, incredible gardens in the city. These are just a couple of random photographs that we took in the last couple of days. I mean, look at the profusion of flowers. You're not only blessed with climate, but again, you're blessed with a lot of knowledge and a lot of interest in this particular subject. Here's an example of open space, but also continuous woodland between properties, which is something I'll just talk about in a minute. Here's an example of, again, ground landscaping and pretty decent tree cover. So what we're saying that at an individual property level, there are many opportunities if you're interested for reinforcing that existing city landscape. And that means either planting in ways that connect into a greenway if it happens to be on your street, continuing the kind of planting that you do in your gardens, whether it's flowers or food, or you're planting for butterflies and things. I mean, you guys have garden tours up the kazoo that, quite frankly, people in Seattle would die to come on, because even Seattle, which is considered the banana belt of the Northwest, does not have as extensive an opportunity for people to go visit gardens. So what we're suggesting is, why not reinforce that, work with your neighbors to create backyard habitat, neighbors that you like, of course, neighbors without fences, and that just means simple things like clustering trees and shrubs to invite certain kinds of habitat in, or reinforcing your gardening techniques. Again, connecting to this streetscape that we're showing by using trees and shrubs that just blend into the bioswales. And I think that's it. One more thing. If you think about civic horticulture, it meets a lot of goals. We've read a lot of material about interest in being sustainable and interest in reinforcing your identity. So this whole notion of civic horticulture and both the streetscape and the individual lot scale would in a way solve that issue. It reinforces the history that you've come from and reinforces your current expertise and your interest in the city as a garden, but it also helps you focus this definition of sustainability, which Google says is one of the most undefined words in the entire internet. It gives you a focus on how do you green, how do you re-nature your city in a way that helps you develop resilience in the face of growing climate change, which is becoming increasingly hard to argue about, even in the face of growth, whatever other pressures are going to face Sebastopol in the future. So, thank you. Steve?
So we heard a lot about today from my colleagues about the region and getting around town, and we heard a lot from you in the last couple of days about walking and biking, and that's what I'm here to talk about. Anybody walk here tonight? Pretty good. Anybody ride a bike here tonight? A few of you? We'll talk about that in just a minute. So Ken showed us this image a little bit earlier, and one of the wonderful things that you've got going for you is the connections that you've got to Santa Rosa and to West County on the trails that are very walkable and bikeable, and hopefully a future collection south to Petaluma. One of the things that we pointed out, or that we discovered really, is that there are a bunch of great destinations very close by in downtown. And but they're also cut up, like we were saying earlier, by the highways. Well, it's only, the whole city is within a 15-minute bike ride from the plaza. And actually, a whole lot of the countryside is only 15 minutes away. And, you know, 15 minutes is not very far. 15-minute walk is really almost all of the central part of the city. We're 15 minutes from the plaza where we are right now. It's just not a happy 15 minutes. So as far as bicycling goes, 5 to 6% of the population would love to ride a bike, and a little sliver of them will ride a bike no matter what. Out on that highway, in the rain, in the winter, they don't care. They'll be out there. Another slim percentage is interested, and they'll do it if there's a bike lane, even if there's major traffic there. There's a whole bunch of people, 30%, that just aren't going to ride a bike. Doesn't matter. You know, you could do whatever. And it's just, you know, for whatever reason, it doesn't fit their lifestyle or their conditions. But there are like 60% that would ride a bike if, fill in the blank. And there's some things we can't do anything about. In Seattle, it's rain. We can't do anything about that. But you don't have to worry about it. In Seattle, it's hills, but you haven't got many hills. You've got some in this kind of southwest corner. But still, you've got great control over why people might walk or bike or not in the city. There's also a huge proportion, maybe 60%, 40 to 60% of the population that can't drive by themselves for whatever reason. They're too young, they're infirm, they haven't got a car for whatever reason, they choose to or just don't. And they either need to get a ride from somebody or walk, bike, or take transit. And so by improving circulation for people walking bike in the city, especially within this 15-minute walk shed of the plaza, is really an equity issue too, to help make the city accessible for everybody. So let's zoom in a little bit and take a look at the plaza. The highway bikeways are there already, but none of you, very few of you, well, 1% of you, that's 2 in this room, will use that bikeway. Did you already go by all these things? Yeah. So here's a whole bikeway network that we're looking at. The trails in purple and potential extensions, the Rialto Trail and the trail to Ives Park. The bike lanes that the city's got, actually the city's got a great bike master plan that could use an update, even though it's fairly recent. And there's a bike lane feasibility study that's actually quite thorough. But there are some new guidelines that are becoming accepted across the country for different types of bike facilities that would really make the landscape the whole city much more accessible for people in that 60% that would, if only, it felt safe to them. And one way to do it is with neighborhood greenways. Neighborhood greenways are quiet streets that are out of traffic, that they're really the sort of street you want to live on because there aren't people roaring by. It's your neighbors that are coming and going at sort of normal pace, hopefully. And it's the kind of street that you'd say to your kid that's maybe even only 7 or 8, go play in the street. Because they're close by, you can watch them and you know that nothing's going to happen to them. Well, High Street and the extensions of it on north and south makes great connections from Pinecrest Elementary School all the way to the high school. And I think there's a great possibility to have a parallel bikeway, pedestrian and bikeway, a neighborhood greenway there. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail too. So the plaza is the center of the universe for Sebastopol. The Railco corridor we talked about would make a great connection through between the two signals that are there on Sebastopol Way, and would connect into the theater, which is up on the top, right in there, from the Redota Trail down here, right through, sneaking between some buildings and taking advantage of McKinley. It would be a lot like the trail, the existing trail that's a couple hundred feet further east that connects over to the east side of the Barlow. Also, this is a really, really important connector that really nobody needs to tell you about. From the end of the Redota Trail to Ives Park is incredibly important. So, some sort of great pedestrian treatment. You've got several really good pedestrian signals in town now, and we just need a couple more there and some other places around the network. The High Street Neighborhood Greenway is a great opportunity to connect from way south, right at the edge of the 15-minute circle at Pinecrest Elementary, all the way north to the West Valley Trail, which connects into the high school. What a great opportunity for families and everybody to be able to get from Ives Park all the way north, but it doesn't get you downtown. But it gets you within a block of downtown. So here's how we get downtown then. By having really high order bike lanes, so buffered bike lanes on the highways, which is better than a bike lane because it gives you a little bit extra space, and a separated cycle track for the circuit around downtown. And we'll tell you how we're going to do that in a little bit. So cycle tracks are separated. So here's what the whole network in downtown looks like. Actually, we can get over to Broomhaven Park and down to Pinecrest School, over the Redota Trail, the Laguna, and up to the high school to connect into all those trails with a really great neighborhood greenway system in green. That was clever, wasn't it, to use green for that? And some the trails and a really high order highway bikeway system. So here's what a cycle track looks like. And this is in a U.S. city, this is in Portland. It's protected by parking. So this is the parked car. The travel lanes are over on the other side of it. There's a little buffer, there's the bikeway, and there's a curb. It can be as simple as paint on the street, and with these little bumper gizmos are braille so people don't, park in there. It could have a shallow curb, or it could have a really bold curb. And this might even be flat between the bikeway and the sidewalk. That's feasible within your street system. This is what Main Street looks like downtown right now. And this is about the only place that people really are comfortable. Although I did see a kid about 14 years old on his way to school this morning riding in the street. Mom, did you know that? He was riding in the street. So what if we turned it into a two-way street instead and had buffered bike lanes, still have parking because we need parking for the businesses downtown. Cycle tracks, sorry, not buffered bike lanes. Cycle tracks, parking that's protecting them, and a lane of traffic in each direction. And with that, we'll turn it over to Ian.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. Love working in your town. Great place. I'm going to be talking about transportation tonight. Can you hear me? Okay. There's the city, and there's the big roads coming into town. There's 2 lanes on all of them, and they all go to one spot. And so we call that the constraint. And so you can deliver more traffic than that intersection can ever handle. Blowing in a little closer, there's 1 lane leaving here. It looks like this. It's the lane leaving. No shortage of signs. 1 lane leaving on the other direction. So to me, I'm thinking maybe this could be a 2-lane street. And that's what it looks like leaving at the other end. And then there's 1 lane east direction on the other street. So the rub, of course, is here at the constraint. And what happened in the past is somebody said, okay, to relieve this constraint, we're going to separate the through movements. And that created the one-way system, which has disadvantaged your city business-wise and otherwise ever since. So what we've heard is that there's no money for a bypass. There's no good location for a bypass. There's some potential for some network, which some of you shared with us. Our conclusions is that congestion isn't the choice. It's kind of a given, especially with what's going on around. But how the city deals with the congestion is your choice, and that's what we really want to focus on. So there's 2 choices you have, basically. One is the traffic first approach, is what has happened historically. And this is where you maximize the throughput through your city at the expense of your quality of life, your safety, and your business community, and your imagination of your downtown. The other choice is a city first approach, which I think is what we're feeling in the community, where you advance the community's vision in a sober, responsible way, cognizant of your crossroads history. And I think that's where I'm feeling the city wants to go. There's a few myths out there I just want to shatter before we begin the rest. One is about roundabouts. This is what a roundabout looks like. They're quite friendly to cyclists. They're very easy to cross as a pedestrian. We're using them in your schools now. You just walk, look to the left, walk to the split island, look to the right, walk across. It's quite easy to do. It's quite safe. Crash rates go down tremendously. Injury deaths go down even more. Child literacy goes up about 50%. But roundabouts have a lot of good attributes to them. They can handle buses, fire trucks. They don't have to be round either. These are ovalabouts at interstate interchanges. This is a barbell type roundabout. Up in Colorado, there's some regular roundabouts on the 4-lane arterial road. This is a peanut about. So they come in all kinds of shapes. I also want to talk a little bit about how, on a regional network basis, how some streets and intersections have biased the traffic to come downtown. So here's where you're starting, let's say, and you want to go someplace up here, and there's 2 choices of a route. And because of the way this is configured, you tend to go towards A. In this example, you tend to use the B route because you don't want to bother with the turn. But a roundabout, it kind of splits the loads more evenly. Once you're in the roundabout, it doesn't really matter which one you use, so it kind of distributes the loads better, and that will become important. Network, we've heard that some folks would like to close some of the streets in downtown, but you don't have enough network already, so keep all your streets, you're going to need them. It helps break up the land uses, and then it provides multiple routing options, which is really important for the locals. The through traffic follows the trailblazing signs, but you need routing options to get around on bike, by car, and foot, and so forth. A fine-grained block structure also allows for easy walking. It's easy to cross a lot of little 2-lane streets as opposed to crossing big streets. It's kind of like going up big stairs compared to little stairs. Mixing the land use is really important for vibrancy, so not just network, but bringing everything you need close at hand. And when you do that, you don't have to move around very much. So this is what we do in terms of travel. 80% of what we do doesn't involve work. So in your downtown, if you can concentrate entertainment and all this kind of stuff in close proximity, it will really help. And particularly if you mix up the work in there as well. This is a vibrant place a long time ago. This is Richmond, Virginia, like maybe, what, 1920 maybe? And the litmus test for all this is, does the change reward the short trip and or the transit trip? And look at that vibrancy, lots of stuff going on there. And this is Richmond, there's little trolley lines, and the whole place is walkable and accessible by transit. Until 1949, where they set aside those values and put forth a value set of rewarding the long trip and the car trip. And if you go to that same street, this is what it looks like today. So they systematically changed the design of the street to reward long trips. It's still a busy street, particularly in the peak hours and rush hours, but you want short trips, because once you get the average trip length down, a lot of them become walking trips, and that's what we think about as vibrancy. So being a traffic engineer, I decided to model your city. And, so here's my model. And so what we have is a bunch of streets coming into a constraint. And so it doesn't really help to keep them going quickly into the city. So those approaches coming in, I would even start choking them down a little bit, making them slower, because getting folks to the jam-up point quicker isn't helping anybody, let alone anybody living along these routes. And then I would do an entryway at the edge, letting people know they're in town, and I would actually change the design of the street. So it might look like a highway out here, but then once you go past the entranceway, you're on what looks and feels like a city street instead of a highway. And then you get sort of a balanced system. We heard folks about, well, we don't want density and mixes downtown because of traffic. Now you could knock down all the buildings around the downtown, and you're still going to have problems at those intersections. That's not the issue. In fact, intensifying and mixing in downtown will actually help, because those are lots of short trips. If you do this sort of thing, all you have is long trips, and they use up your car carrying capacity. It's not good value for your city. So here is, I always have trouble with the pronunciation, Luma Street. And look at it, it looks like a highway. However, it's signed, and it says it's radar enforced, so everyone goes slowly, right? Anyway, the street's saying go fast, the sign's saying go slow. I'm saying maybe you should think about making the street self-enforced and make folks go slow. This is going the other direction on Main Street, so come on. So when you ever have more than one lane going in the same direction, people will weave and speed and so forth. And so a two-way, two-lane street, you go the speed of the guy in front of you, so it makes a lot of sense. And you got plenty of room for bikes and so forth. Now look at the scale. Like, we're in a little place here. 8,000 people in the city or something, and 40 in the area. Look at the size of the lanes and that. So it's saying, this is out in the suburbs or the rural area. I can't talk when music's going. So here's, this is what we call the transit. So this is urban, this is rural. So in an urban area, you expect lots of pedestrians, trees and grades, low-scale lighting, nice materials, slow speeds. In rural areas, you expect forest, less quality materials, higher speeds. In the suburbs, you expect in between. And what you don't want to do is import suburban ideas and rural ideas into your city. So you've imported huge overheads and high speeds into your city in terms of design. And what you want is what we call a consistent design vocabulary in town. So for example, at 116 and Main, instead of looking like this, maybe it could look like this. And now the strategy in the past has been to separate the through movements, and the strategy is to remove the lefts so that this can be shrunk, so you can easily cross short cycle lengths, and there's the protected bike lane. So you come down on the bike, you go through it like a kind of a conventional bike lane so everyone can see you, then you go back to where it's friendly. And so this is what it could look like so this half shows you'd be riding along, you come down, you go through the intersection. The other side shows what it would be typically along the side. And so you can stop at a shop or stop and park your bike. And so it's really quite comfortable to a huge population of potential cyclists. So here's the whole area. And if you look at the traffic volumes, it's like a big giant T intersection. This one's a bit of a minor approach, but this is a huge T intersection. And what we're thinking is if we could get some of the trips to not have to come downtown when they have no business in the city, it would really help the city. And so here's the real volumes, and the size of the dots are proportional to the volume. You can see these huge volumes coming down here to the constraint. Now, if we could use the existing regional road network with maybe a few tweaks, these little volumes can go up easily, and these green ones can go down and really help your downtown situation. But there's 3 areas which need to be addressed, and I want to thank Colin for helping me with this. We're going to look at this one first. So there's lots of ways to get around, and so this is 7 miles through this way. This is 8. It's actually faster, even though it's just slightly further. But it needs a little connection built, just to make it feasible. And then at the south end, this is what I was talking about. This intersection biases the traffic to force them to kind of come downtown when there's a perfectly good regional route up that way. And if it were a roundabout, folks would use either route. It would make a lot of sense. And then there's the other route, again, faster and shorter in this case. But we've got this really peculiar interchange design where it give all the circuitous routing, so folks actually, will come downtown because of that. And with a minor modification, folks would have choices. And with a roundabout, even better, then they would be distributed without having to make a turn at an intersection. And so then let's look over here. Oh, no, we're done this. The other thing, entry features, you should announce to people that they're coming into town and expect pedestrians and cyclists. And here's a good one in Germany. So you're in a rural area, you're coming into town, and notice how the edge treatments change. They got a couple of gateway signs. You get closer, the road gets narrower. And as you get into town, the section encourages you to go slower and slower. So I was going 60 miles an hour. By the time I got here, I was going 20 miles an hour without any signs or police or anything. And the street environment told me what speed to go. No curbs here, nice protected bike lane, parking, great little main street. This is your square. Look at a little island floating in an ocean of car stuff. So I just want to introduce this. This is the University of Central Florida. It has 50,000 students, a big university, more than your whole regional population. And this is their main shopping street. And when we designed this street, we designed it with no curbs. And so there's the residences. So the students, and particularly the mobility impaired folks, can get around campus in an equitable, barrier-free way. This is Sulphur Springs, Texas. I just want to draw your attention to the square because it reminds me of your square. Except this one's bigger. This one, miserable. Well, yours isn't as miserable, is it? It was a miserable place with a nice building. And it used to be the one-way state truck route went like this, and then up the other way like that. And they have a parking lot like you do, and then some space over here. So what we did is we two-wayed all the streets, and we put the parking out of the middle onto the edges. And so now there's all kinds of events. People have rediscovered the square. They picnic there. They have their farmers market. A lot of social exchange going on. They have bands, and the kids come out and go to the dance. And they've got July 4th. Everything goes on there. They have reenactments, and you have to bring your gun here in Texas. And then now there's no curbs, so when you're having big events, you can spill out into the street without tripping on the curbs. And then, of course, it added a lot of value to the area, and so this empty store redeveloped, and now there's a restaurant and some housing up top. And then all kinds of shops opened up. So something, we're thinking mix in some of these ideas, and so what we drew here, in fact, Jill drew it. What we've done is we raised this all up to sidewalk height, so there's no curbs anywhere here. This is what we call a square about. And so it has the same idea as you have now, where you have basically effectively one lane going this way, but you can go back so you can turn around. But instead of just this being considered the square, it goes from building face to the future building faces all around it. So the imagination of this space goes from building to building. Nice materials in here, art, very accessible, very friendly to everybody. And this corner, you can see it resembles like the corner of a roundabout. So it'd be very walkable, very pedestrian friendly. And then we're whole as a parking. That parking lot, all the parking's been made up around the edges. So there's no loss of parking, but just a much better space. So with that, I'll thank you.
Last couple of points, then we'll take questions and probably have 5 or 10 minutes. But so very quickly, I just want to talk about a couple policy issues and talk about how people move forward tomorrow morning when you wake up and want to start doing everything that we said. So first, in terms of parking, we heard in the meetings different things. We heard some people tell us parking was in the wrong place, other people telling us that maybe it wasn't enough parking. And from my standpoint, this city has more than enough parking. You have some parking management problems. So, parking on Main Street is the most valuable spots there are. The figures for large cities, a parking spot, if it's used by customers, brings in about $30,000 of business to retail. Now, it's going to be a lot less for a smaller town, but it's still worth a lot. If that parking spot is taken by, say, an employee, it brings in no business to the store. And so you really think about the management for doing it, how you're trying to track. So in this picture on the bottom, you have a spot that's a couple blocks from downtown, but 2-hour parking, so nobody's there, because it's a long walk. I gotta walk the whole, whatever you said, 167 steps, and I have to come back within 2 hours. So it seems like what you really want is you want to try to figure out how do you get employees to park in that spot. So that shouldn't be 2 hours. That should be longer term, because you want to push the employees. And you should figure out where you want to limit things. I suspect this is really controversial, but of course, if you really want to have management, you start putting parking meters on Main Street, not anywhere else. Then you don't get a ticket for staying over 2 hours. If I want to come downtown and eat and spend more money, that's great. But you want to discourage, again, the employees from parking. So some of that is what the city does for management, some is what the chamber and employers should be helping, encourage their employees with. And then just think about events. Ian showed you pictures of Texas and how that's sort of alive with events. You guys have some great events downtown, but frankly, not enough of them. So think about how do you get more events downtown. Events are important for the event itself, because people come to the event and then spend money. Obviously, your farmers market does some of that, and more of those kinds of events. They're also important for sort of building up a sense of place. The downtown is where things are happening. So how do you deal with that? So in terms of moving forward, you're all working on a new general plan update. There's a lot of things that can't happen until you do a general plan update. A lot of the really big picture things just take a lot of work and you need to do that. But there's an awful lot of things that don't have to wait for the plan. And so we think you should be thinking about those long-term things that have to wait for your plan now, and so within the next year or two, start planning for those things. But you'd also be thinking about what are the things that you can start doing very quickly. So whether it's working with City Council as they do their goal setting for some of these things, whether it's working with all the different partners and developing different partnerships, there's a lot of things that go forward. So I'm not going to go through this whole list. This PowerPoint will be posted on the AIA website within a couple of days. Our final report will be available both to you all and on the AIA website within a couple of months. So these things are there. But generally, the quick start things we're thinking about are things like there's some relatively simple regulatory changes that you can do that can make a big difference in terms of making things attractive and addressing some of these problems. There are some things you can do literally with a can of paint going out there for the streets. So it may be that a cycle track is going to take a long time. But some of your lanes, we didn't measure, but are 14 feet wide. It isn't difficult to go in and repaint a lane and say, well, these lanes really should be 10 feet wide or maybe 11 at most. So there's very low-hanging fruit you can do within a year. And then there's other things, again, I'm not going through this list, but you can imagine medium-term things that take a little bit longer. And what you're seeing both our short-term list and medium-term list is both some things you can actually do on the ground and some things that take longer, but you just need to go through that consensus building process. So, it may be it's going to take longer to figure out exactly how do you get two-way streets. But that doesn't mean we should be waiting 10 years to start having a discussion. So a lot of discussions going forward can help reinforce the planning process. And again, the longer term things, some of these longer term things are long term because it needs the general plan. Some are because they're just really expensive. Going to two-way streets is going to require money from Caltrans. But you need to get the queue to get money and keep it moving forward. And the roundabouts are going to require money. But again, you start the process. And then that's it. So, actually, go backwards. So I'll leave you with this slide, which is sort of, this is really sort of a summary of what we all said, so I'm not going to go through this, but sort of main important points, take-home points, and all get your own. So we will take questions.
Could you repeat the question, please? I'm sorry. No, I need you to repeat the question because I was talking, so I'm sorry. There are several definitions for greenways. The original definition really, from a planning point of view, really talks about trails and corridors, frankly, along rivers. It's both a strategy and a place. So it's a way to protect river corridors through riparian vegetation, and it's also a way to establish recreation. So you build a trail corridor, make sure that it's heavily vegetated so that it meets multiple goals, protecting the river, providing access for recreation, and it's used also as a conservation tool. In this particular instance, in Sebastopol, what we're using greenway is almost as a community term to talk about a streetscape that provides vegetation, some ecological principles that really speak to protecting the environment, whether it's filtering water through bioswale, providing trees for street canopy, which helps to shade the street, do the urban heat thing, and also provides a very calming experience for residents as they walk through this neighborhood. So we have, I don't want to say we've expanded that definition, but I think we have applied it in a kind of a civic way to embrace a lot of the other aspects that we're talking about. Steve, do you want to add to it?
That's what I wanted to point to. You've heard various team members use the word sustainability, and sustainability certainly includes the environment. A city where nature is part of it. But we're sort of using a broader definition of sustainability, which is clearly about the environment, which you've heard in a lot of things. Clearly about a strong economy. Everything we're talking about makes the city more vibrant, more successful, and that helps the economy. And clearly about equity in terms of serving all your residents, not just wealthy residents or some residents. Yeah.
The question for Leslie, do you have any zoning suggestions for the lumber company block and underutilized blocks and behind that?
I think it's a great mixed-use site. I think that what Ken was saying, that it needs to be a good street edge along the street. And with those trees there, it'll give you a little extra space. But I think the best thing is really to find, if you can find a good developer that shares your values. It would be an awesome spot for a hotel. I know that a lot of people were kind of thinking about that. But it should be something that has a mix of uses and something that really feels like it fills a need in the ecosystem of uses around that square, enlivens it, makes it a fun, active place to be. Zoning, zoning has tools about massing, but I think the design guidelines would then help. But really, it is going to depend on the person that wants to develop that, exactly what the uses are that they have in mind.
Is this how you're going to handle your Q&A? You're not going to pass around a microphone or have people line up and...
We don't really have a long enough microphone to hand out, so we're just trying to repeat questions as people come up. Yeah.
Are we going to need to vary utilities for the greenways or the street for roads? I think Davis got very, we've got a number of fights already going on.
So questions, do you need to bury utilities and greenways?
No.
Experience with community impact reports as it relates to zoning and development.
The idea of a community impact report in relationship to zoning is one of those issues that I'm trying to suggest that you address prior to the process of going through that kind of entitlement. One of the things you can do as a community is start to think about more specifically what you want to accomplish and what mitigation would be necessary for the kind of development that would be appropriate for any particular site the way you see it under your zoning and your general plan. So that the results of a community impact report are going to be understood before that process starts to go through the details.
That's what I said. Think about it from a developer standpoint. If you're asking a developer to spend a lot of money with an uncertain outcome, you're more likely to be creating an area of friction between the community and the developer. If you tell the developer, here's what we expect if you want to play, then you're actually more likely to have the developer be happy, obviously, but you're being happy because you know what you're going to get.
So, talk about the working arts and probably in-house Florence. So, put in the words of Greenway, I really like the Sebastopol on Artway. It was planned out, to coincide with that. Greenway. And, I'm trying to look at the movies that I want to talk about since placing the downtown city centers that is starting to work here to start occupying and generating people, but it served as a temple meeting to connect face-to-face. But I think it's important to also create bulletin boards that are attractive and the way to community have lost off and then, as part of the central place, we have gathering, functional, circular streams, covered, solar, lighting, things like that. Both board messages, but then also message board on the occupied church. For study by down to and that traffic zone, they might want to see that they want to drive up and see that.
That's great. So what I wanted to add to that, did everybody hear what she...
No.
I'm going to summarize for you, but in addition to the Greenway thing we talked about, she mentioned having an art street, and then also talked about the Central Square being a community meeting place that in the I don't want to say tradition, but as the occupied people used it, was actually an information center. And so the opportunity would exist for kiosks and bulletin boards that would provide the community with information over time. And so what I wanted to just tell you is that there's a very interesting program in Portland, Oregon. It's called City Repair. It's a nonprofit organization, and it takes neighborhood intersections and it creates a neighborhood intersection. And what that means is the neighborhood and other members of the community are welcome to come and create nodes on those four corners that provide exactly what you're talking about at a very neighborhood scale. And so, for example, in Portland, there are several intersections that the neighborhood has painted. Some of them are painted as sunrises. Some of them, the paving in the intersection is actually painted. Some of them are painted in geometric figures, but each corner has something on it. One corner has a pea patch and a little tot lot. Another corner has cob benches. A third corner has a little coffee kiosk with coffee all day long and a posting where all neighborhood news is posted. And then a fourth corner is actually a little neighborhood library, and people come and take their books and trade them. And there are several of them in Portland. It might be a very interesting thing for you to look up as a model for how the Greenway idea could take shape in the city. I'm sure there's a website, it's called cityrepair.org, and if you need more information, I'd be happy to provide it.
Making things beautiful ain't gonna do any good if people don't respect it anymore. You know, you see I ride in this chair, and if I could have $1 for every time someone just almost hit me, and $100 for every time I have been hit by a car who's not looking, and no one gives a bloody, thing. Everyone, especially down the one-way this way. And when it comes this way, I almost get hit. And then when I say, hey, 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 they just flip me on. I'm wrong. You know, and that's the end. You know, I'm not a second-class citizen. You know, and I find it very offensive that I have to weave in and out of people who don't give a what you know.
Who? So,
I mean,
what?
even pedestrians. You know, when you go down the driveway, you know, if I'm on the driveway and I have to go down to the bottom and I have to spin up, and people walk on the other side and make me do that, you know, when they should be walking up and down, which is even for them to let me do it straight. No, you know, and then when I get mad at them, they flip me off and I'm in the wrong.
So what he's saying is, as a pedestrian, he doesn't get the respect he ought to, and as a handicapped person, the motorists have an expectation of being able to go through quickly and easily, and they see him as an obstacle, and they disrespect him and hit him or challenge him. And it's an equity issue, it's a safety issue, it's a quality of life issue, it's an environment issue. We heard from a lot of people about either on bike or on foot or however, they don't feel comfortable. And one of the attributes of a walkable city is comfort, where you feel at ease in your surroundings and you don't feel threatened by, in this case, particularly motorists. And yeah, and in fact, cycling, we got. He just mentioned also that we have cycling and pedestrian conference as well. So what we're trying to do is create an environment where all the different user groups can use the street in harmony. And I think those are all what we're trying to get at. We're trying to produce a street that doesn't set up the expectation that it's a highway and they get through on highway terms, that there is a give and take. You're in a city and you have to go through respectfully and on the community's terms. So that's what this is all about. And in some of the places where we had time, we drew details about how to do the raised streets, where it gives non-motorists even a higher profile to make it even easier to get around. I really should answer the question about the power lines properly. To plant street trees, you don't need to take down and bury the power lines. It's incredibly expensive. With the width of the streets, a lot of the bulb outs and so forth, where we'd be planting trees, you wouldn't have much interference anyway. And then there's policies about how much interference you can have with power lines and trees. But I don't think you'd have that big issue. And if you did, it's easier to move the pole one way or another than burying the line if you really had that conflict. But you can remove swags. There's probably lots of extra lines going in all kinds of random directions that you might be able to organize so that they don't have to interfere with the branches as much.
Excuse me, we can hear you just fine. We can't hear anybody, people ask questions and everybody wants to hear everything.
Okay, we're trying to repeat questions.
We gotta make a solution to this.
Yeah, okay.
I was here on.
I'm leaving, this sucks. I'm not being I am the land is me. I don't think you have any real good intentions here at all. And it's truth with lies.
I was in to show you a sketch.
What?
Amazing traffic. And it easier. I saw it with a small roundabout. I wonder why it has for assuming that
Yeah, the question was, why didn't we use roundabouts in our designs at Highway 12? It was just a matter of time. I just didn't have time to look at it. So if you wanted to look at roundabouts, which are incredibly effective intersection control, and there are different types. There's compact ones, which are a little smaller. I think the smallest one is about 85 feet in described diameter. A regular roundabout is probably 110 to 130 feet in diameter. So you just have to measure it to see if it fits. It's the outside curb. So in addition to that, you would have the sidewalks and so forth. But that's really the measurement that we tested out. So I just didn't have time to look at it. It wasn't like it wasn't a good idea.
Thank you for the roundabout. Thank you so much. I'm not always like that.
So, I have to repeat that. He said thank you for the let's as a community agree not to call it a bypass. It's actually using the existing regional network that already exists more effectively. Because right now you're concentrating way too much traffic on too few streets, and it puts the pressure to make them wider, which costs a lot of money. When you have the streets already, a few little changes like that can distribute the loads and add a lot of value to your city.
I'm thinking this, but I wonder, someone mentioned something about connecting the plaza with downtown, and I didn't get what was said about that. Can you elaborate?
That's something that we heard from a number of people. Oh, sorry. She asked about the connections between the plaza and downtown, and she wanted to discuss that a little bit more. There are some wonderful little through routes where the cookie shop is, and near the bank. There are some routes that do go through, and those do a number of things. They're a very wonderful scale. It means that you can have more retail space along there, and it also means that it's more porous. There are more choices to go through. And I don't remember if you saw the cartoon with the multiple choices versus the stair steps that had just 2 steps. But the more intimate scale, friendly, people kind of places that connect make a lot more active places to be, and you have some of them, and if you use them in a pretty creative way, you already have those spaces there to use, and there's opportunities for more.
And also remember, real distance isn't always the same as perceived distance. So part of the discussion about encouraging new development to be up to the street is about sort of framing the street. And if that happened, then some of those distances would feel a lot shorter. That's just, yeah.
It is not always comfortable to speak the truth, and this is one of those times, and I hope you'll give me a moment to do so. You were in error when you said that the seeds for this core plan were organic to Sebastopol. That is not true, sir. This is the early stages in indoctrination employing the Delphi technique, and you would do well to search the Delphi technique when you get home. It is designed to bring a group to a predetermined conclusion, but create the illusion that their input arrived at a consensus. Now, this was classic Delphi technique that you employed the last couple of days. Smart growth is not organic to the community that it comes from. It is the hardscape that globalists prefer. And they instill it through an alphabet of different NGOs and coalitions that are called NGOs for a reason. They're not part of our government. Smart growth looks the same in Chesapeake Bay as Chile, as China. And it's not a coincidence.
Thank you.
So, when you wake up, the question to our public officials is, where and when did they think it was appropriate to be accountable to and take directives from a globalist NGO in a representative government like we have here? So when you wake up, and you will...
I think let me answer the question. So the question is sort of, is this is there a preordained script for this? And I think our charge is not, this is not part of your general plan update. So it's really your job as a community to reach consensus. Our job isn't to tell you what to do. Our job is to give you information, which I would think is a good thing for you to make an informed decision. So
I I just was curious what the next step that you think, because here's all this great momentum going, is there something, a practical next step, another meeting we're having?
Right. So the question is, what's the next step? And as I say, we're outsiders. We know that you know the community much better than we do, and you have to make the decision. Our ability is to bring in people from different disciplines from around the country and give you ideas as you move forward. So from our standpoint, the only next step is that we'll be doing a final report that basically summarizes what we said here today, and then we're available for email questions, after that if you have things. So it's really going to be up for you all for what you do. What I hope is, as City Council does their goal setting for next year, they think about this and reflect on that. As the core project is their goal setting, they think about it. So we're really hoping to inspire you all in whatever process you